What's up, Math Stars? Today, we are just going to continue to build on what we did last week in regards to fractions and comparing numbers. But today, and moving forward, for this week, we will be comparing numbers using the this handy dandy number line. And as you all know, review a number line pretty much just starts at 0 and counts up from there. And as you can see, our number line now is marked with fractions. So it's not just whole numbers anymore. We are dealing with number lines that have fractions on them. And so our problems essentially want us to take our fractions that they give us and then just place them on the number line. And just want to emphasize right now that this does not need to be perfect. I do not need to perfectly place 1/3 on this number line. The main situation is that we just want to be sure we know if the fraction is larger than 1, is it smaller than 1, is it larger than 1/2, is it smaller than 1/2. So it does not need to be perfect, but just needs to be in the ballpark. So let's do some example problems and then you all should be good to go. So we'll start with 1A, and it asks us to plot the following points on the number line without measuring. Okay, simple enough. Let's run through 1, 2, and 3. So our first fraction is 1/3. Okay, 1/3. Let's just review really quickly and just draw a tape diagram just so I get an image of this 1/3. So if I would translate into 1/3 into tape diagram, it would look like this. I would have the 3 equal pieces, start off with 0, go to 1/3, then 2/3, and then 3/3. Ooh, and I know that 3/3, because the numerator and denominator are the same, I know that that is just equal to 1. Okay. 1/3's right here. And just by looking at this, it's very obvious to me that 1/3 is very far away from 1. And it's a lot closer to 0. Okay, it's a lot closer to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and benchmark this and say that 1/3 is right over here, close to that 0 point. Okay, let's do now this 5/6 or 5/6. So let's graduate. Okay, we're just going to eye this one. We're just going to think using our brains. We're not going to use a tape diagram. Okay. So I know I'm really confident over the fact that 6/6 is equal to 1. Because I know if my number on top is the same as my denominator, my number on bottom, I know for a fact that is equal to 1. And 5/6, well, isn't 5 just super close to 6? So isn't 5/6 just super close to 1? Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and plot this 5/6 pretty close to my 1 mark. Okay, let's move on and now do 7/12 or 7/12. Okay, not going to draw a tape diagram. And 7, so I would know that 12/12 would equal to 1. But 7 is pretty far from 12. Okay, let's try to benchmark this by knowing about 1/2. So 1/2. Okay, 7 is pretty close to 6 though, isn't it? And if I had 6/12, well, 6/12 is just the same thing as 1/2, isn't it? Because 6 is just half of 12. So if I added 6 plus 6 together, I would get 12. So I know that 6/12 is 1/2, or is the same thing as 1/2. and that 7 is super close to 6. So this 7/12, this 7 over 12, must fall pretty close to this 1/2 mark. Okay? So I plotted all of my points. This is my 1/3, my 7/12, and my 5 over 6. Eventually, we're going to use multiplication to place these in more exact marks, but for right now, we are just benchmarking it. Okay, ready to move on to B. It asks us to use the number line to compare the fractions by writing greater than, less than, or equal to on the lines. Okay, we're super good at this. We're super great at this. So this should be pretty easy. Okay, its first question is asking me 7 over 12. Is that greater than, less than, or equal to 1/2? Well, just by looking over here, I know that 7 over 12 is greater than 1/2. And the alligator, my sign, always chomps, always eats at the bigger number. And that is what it is doing. I also could have benchmarked this because we compared 7/12 to 6/12, and we know that 6/12 is equal to 1/2, and 7 is bigger than 6. Okay. Next problem, I have 7/12 and 5/6. By looking at my number line, I know that my alligator is going to chomp the 5/6, or 5 over 6. Ooh, not good teeth I'm drawing today. Okay. Because from my number line, 5 over 6, well, 5 is super close to 6. And 7 is pretty far off from 12. So it's safe to say that 5 over 6 is a bigger number than 7 over 12. Okay. I want you guys to try both A and B on your own. Use the same steps that we did for 1A. So as I said, wanting to clarify, this does not need to be perfect. You're simply just using our skills that we built on these last few weeks to imagine and see, okay, is 11/12? Would that be closer to 0, 1/2, or 1? Same thing for 1/4, same thing for 3/8. Then all you're going to do is compare. Okay, so you're going to compare 11 over 12 to 1 over 4, and also compare 1 over 4 to 3 over 8. Okay, so go ahead, try 2A, try 2B on your own, and optional if you want to explain how you plotted the points. Just explain, write down your reasonings. Totally feel free to do that as well. Okay, let's move on to 3. And let's do one example problem together, and then you guys should be all good to go for the rest of the problems. So let's do A together, and then let's do J together. So let's do the easiest one and the hardest one together. Okay, so it asks us to compare the fractions given below by writing greater than, less than on the lines. And then remember, our benchmark numbers are 0, 1/2, and 1. So these are the numbers we're just going to be constantly referring back to. Okay? And if you would like, the next page also has a handy dandy just number lines for you if you want to also continue practicing putting them on these number lines. Okay. So my first problem, I'm comparing 1/2 and 3/4, or 3 over 4. Okay. Okay, 1/2 is a benchmark number, because I know 1/2 is just in between 0 and 1. How about this 3/4 though? Well, I know that 4 over 4 is equal to 1 because the numerator is the same as the denominator. And that 3 is pretty close to 4. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead then and say that 3/4 is larger than, is greater than 1/2. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and plot that. Plot 3/4 in between 1/2 and 1. Okay? And let's do J also right now. I have 7/16. Then I have 51/100. Okay? Much more complicated, right? So I have large denominators, I have larger numerators, okay? But let's go back to our benchmark. Let's go back to our benchmark numbers. So our benchmark numbers again are that 0, that 1/2, and 1. And right off the bat, just looking at 51/100, I know that half of 100 is 50. Okay, so 50/100 would equal to 1/2. Okay, because 50 is half of 100. So just by that, I know that 51/100 is pretty close to 1/2. It's pretty close to 1/2. How about the 7/16? Well, I could also think about 8/16. Because I know that 8 is half of 16, that 8/16 would equal to 1/2. And 7/16 is pretty close to that 8/16, right? So 7/16 is also pretty close to 1/2. But we also see that 7 is less than 8, right? But then we have this 51, and that's greater than the 50/1/2 mark. So even though these numbers are pretty close together, we can say that 51/100 is greater than 7/16. Just because, yes, they're both closer to 1/2, but 7/16 would be less than 1/2, while 51/100 would be greater than 1/2. Okay? Have a great day, math stars.